certainly not the rural poor. And that is one of the things that we've seen in countries that have been able to change that and really focus those and target, whether it's the subsidies, inputs, to really target the smallhold farmer, for example, or get cash and services out to the poorest households. Then you see a change in the poverty profile of the country.
Would you say that sometimes policies made by governments also have an effect to this? Let's talk about, again, the issue brought up, having, poverty numbers. Obviously, no citizen wants to go hungry, but we're living in a country with so much arable land, vast, so much water bodies, but the capacity at which we're producing sometimes is not to the fullest. We've been boasting of a bumper harvest, but still, depending on a bit of droughts or pest invasions and things like that, people still go hungry in a country like Zambia, where we're still exporting maize, we're still boasting of bumper harvest. Again, from a UN perspective, where do we go wrong for people to go hungry, despite the fact that everything is to our advantage, the weather, the land, the water, and the people themselves?
This country, it's fortunate. I always say that with the abundance of natural resources, you're right, it's not just copper, that it's wealth. When you look at water and the land and the forests, the wildlife, the fisheries this country has, you're right, there shouldn't be hunger in this country. And I would say it's not hunger, it's undernutrition, and children still being malnourished in some places. Now that is often, and this is not just in Zambia, this is often a matter of having the right food at the right time, at the right place. So it's a distribution issue. It's the fact that in some parts of the country you do see the bumper harvests, and they're also going in to feed the people. But in other parts of the country, we're not moving the food around fast enough. So we're back to the fact that with the high oil prices, with the fact that transport and the road network is not what it should be, we are unable yet to make sure that the whole country is covered in a way that there will not be a dearth of food at any point of time. But the other issue I want to bring up is nutrition. We tend to think that culturally here we're very focused on maize. And yet it would be interesting to hear, and this is one of the things we want to hear from these post-2015 dialogues, is what do the younger generation, no matter where they're living, really feel is a nutritious diet. And it is a cost-effective diet if we bring more protein in there and diversify, not just agriculture-based, but our meal that we're eating. And that will also make a big difference. So moving the food around and making sure that people are getting a nutritious diet at affordable prices will also make a big difference.
Now, you did touch one interesting subject just a while ago on high oil prices. Global statistics coming out also show that the world is poised to suffer a setback with also equally high food prices. We also have this talk of alternative energy, the world wanting to use food itself to produce energy. But let me talk about Africa in perspective. We have also for a long time had a donor dependency kind of a syndrome. All these problems we talked about, poverty, education, I mean, these are things that Africans themselves and their governments must be sorting out. Is the global community in a position, as we go beyond 2015, able to support Africa on food donations, budget support? I mean, there's economic pressures world over now. What are we seeing beyond 2015 from a global economic perspective?
I think, we will see, although the pressures are indeed there, and they're particularly so when it comes to oil and oil prices. But I think you're seeing maybe a recovery in the Eurozone. And you certainly are seeing that there's enough cash out there in the international economy. Because when you float a bond, you've got enough investors interested in Africa and in Zambia. I think that period of saying that we have to wait for donor aid and budget support and all of that, I think is way over. I think now you're seeing markets being allowed to thrive, and in countries where they have responsible markets and responsible institutions, I think you're seeing a different set of capital markets and financial instruments that are coming in. That has moved way beyond the old aid dependency. So I think that conversation is
But do you
dead.
think that African governments, Kanni, are coming to the party? Let me give you quick examples in Zambia. We just did what you're talking about. We raised $750 million out of a bond. There's still questions around within citizens in the country as into which priority areas is government putting these monies? Are we seeing the tangible development?
Sure.
Not so long ago, we had situations where monies were set up aside in a budget. Treasury would still keep certain monies unused over millions of kwaches, and you wonder, people are still going hungry, people still have no access to good health, but we still keep money and return it after a budget. So one tends to think, is there seriousness in some of these African governments with such examples being given?
Well, I mean, my point was that I don't think it's a money issue.
Yeah.
Not in the international markets and not in the local markets. Your point that people should keep questioning is absolutely right, because bringing the money in is one thing. Using it in a responsible way, managing that debt, because one is taking on significant sovereign debt, managing that debt, repaying on time, and making sure that it's towards productive investments, and bringing in public and private sector together to work on this, I think is critical. Otherwise, you're back to a dependency just on another instrument. So I think just even, I mean, if you look at whether it's a maize market, whether you look at all of the commodity markets here, just breathing air into it and allowing some competition with the right regulatory framework, because you can't just have a free-for-all, is very important. It's interesting that in the Zambia consultations that are going on post-2015, so far, when asked what is the #1 priority of seeing a change and what will transform, Zambians say it is a responsible, honest government that will do the right thing. Yeah? Globally, it is quality education. Yeah. So, I mean, they're all in the top 3, because even globally, when we look at the survey results coming in, it's often quality education, improved healthcare, and a responsible, honest government is all up there. Yeah. Similarly here, but here, right, the top 2, the first one is a responsible, honest government, and the second one is managing well our natural resources, because Zambians know that their future depends on how well they preserve, manage, and create better wealth for more people from their natural resources.
I mean, a bit away from issues of MDGs, but in a way related, because now you're talking about the responses out of these consultations, both at a national level and talking about issues of responsibility and credibility of governments. This has a lot to do, again, with laws, and key among them, obviously, a constitution. We're still, you know, grappling with it. But as you and I know that you have been engaging with government at different levels. Also, support for us to transform our governance system has been made through various UN, you know, agencies. Again, what do you make of Zambia's course? There have been so many political promises, but up to now, we're still in a situation where we do not have a constitution which appeals to many Zambians to provide what you're talking about.
You know, the constitution-making process in any country today, as opposed to those who put in place their constitutions 100 years ago, has become a much more complex and complicated process. Because today, with the kind of freer media, the access people have to information, everyone wants to get involved. Everyone wants to have a say. If you think of some of the old constitutions that have actually stood the test of time, these were not written through a wide, long-ranging consultations. Not every citizen of those countries put pen to paper. So we've also got to look at a pragmatic way where one has an open space for debate and dialogue, And then how do you bring that back in and really create a fundamental set of principles that the country can live by? I think maybe we're trying to be a bit too ambitious. You know, and a lot of articles, issues, laws that probably are secondary to a constitution are all getting pegged and making it a very heavy process. So at some point, there has to be some rational decision making here on whether this is going to, how long is this going to get drawn out, and what really is at the core that all Zambians should really come around, and then they should trust in their delegated authorities, their leadership, their parliaments, to take a secondary set of laws into a different domain.
I know that you sit on the fence probably as international, organizations, but with what is happening on the ground, I mean, it's happening around you. Do you see much engagement, especially from the citizenry themselves, and the many worries again in such a process is that these things are prone to manipulation, and like you rightly put it, much of the debate, especially for the Zambian situation, comes about obviously on political items like the 50+1 vote threshold, the presidential running mate, but we seemingly are not discussing critical areas like Bill of Rights and so on and so forth. Do you see engagement and the public, the citizenry themselves beginning to understand the issues that will alleviate poverty, like is the MDG aspects from the Constitution?
You know, I would like to see more debate and discussion on the development issues. I can understand the interest and the engagement on the political issues, and at the end of the day, these two things are intertwined, because if you don't have the democratic space and a strong and accountable set of institutions, doesn't matter what you say in your constitution, it's not going to deliver for the people, right? So there has to be engagement and understanding of what that political representation space is, who is going to be my delegated authority, how do I elect the person to represent me, etc. So I'm glad that debate is on, and I think through there has been significant conversations on all of these issues, not just this time around. This is a discussion that's been had since '91, yeah, if not before. Exactly. So at some point, it's what you said about previously. Sometimes the conversations then can just go on forever. And at some point, one has to just stop, take a deep breath and say, okay, what are we going to put, such as the key principles in a Bill of Rights, that really are at the heart of the governing principles of a country? And then let's look at acts and laws and bylaws that can be passed over a period of time. Otherwise, 20 years later, Costa, you and I are going to be having the same conversation.
Now, in moving forward, obviously, we are talking about post-2015 consultations. Obviously, some of these, something is happening, others not happening. Let's look at aspects, for example, promoting of gender equality and empowerment of women. Again, this has been a very strong agenda in many African countries, but sadly enough, looking at issues to do with SADC setting, I think it was SADC and the AU setting some sort of benchmark in terms of percentage women representing in decision-making positions. As a country, again, we fall far short, even looking at our current parliamentary representation. I know that the president has appointed a number of women in key, decision-making positions in government. But again, what is your take on goal number 3 that looks at gender equality and women empowerment?
Well, if I take the target that you just spoke to, which is women in representative political positions, then we are far behind. At local council level, we're only 6% of women. And on a national parliament, we're at 11.3%. So forget the SADC target of 50%, the MDG target of 30%, we're nowhere there. Now, in countries that have made the change, they have had to take special measures. You cannot wait often for political systems, cultures, traditions to change. They will change, but it takes a long, long time. and they have to be urged and nudged forward. So I have been very strong, and all of us in the UN system have said special measures such as whether it's minimum quotas, whether it's affirmative action laws, have to be put in place to really try to trigger the larger number. And then once that tipping point has been reached, then one can even remove those quotas, remove those affirmative action laws, and let the natural course of things happen. But we cannot be. We are one of the lowest representations, not just in Africa, but in the world. This is not possible.
Where do we seem to be losing it? I think, especially for Parliament, the numbers they were not good before, but I know they were a percentage over. We have gone down. There have been so many conferences and so many policies, even a ministry being set up specifically for women. But where do we seem to be going wrong? I mean, even if you look at Zambia's education system, there's been so much promotion of girl-child education, but where are we seemingly going wrong?
Well, with political representation, it starts with who the political party lists. And if political parties aren't mandated to put X percent, let's say 30% of women as on their party list, you are not going to see the equivalent representation in Parliament or in local councils. So I think, and again on the education system, that is what has made the change, which is the wish to make gender parity, right? And we're seeing that now in primary schools. Yeah. And many countries have included that in secondary and tertiary education as well. So the question is to try and get to parity on all of these in terms of access to education, in terms of access to political representation. I think here we've got to take some bold steps in this regard. The other key factor, if you look here, there's a significant and growing wage differential between men and women.
Before we come to talk about that, I would like you to keep that point in mind. Let's talk about issues to do with culture. How has this been a barrier, not only for Africa, but I know that world over, there are certain cultural systems that are even later on enshrined into government systems for women and girls not to attain education. They can do this, and not, there are so many don'ts for women on cultural basis across the world. How is this being broken down from a UN perspective?
You know, the good thing is, and we can't hide behind the excuse of our cultures, because when we see some things that are obviously wrong and shouldn't be headed in that direction, cultures change. They need to be urged and pushed to do so. But if I take the issue right now that has come up, which I think you have a strong traditional leadership behind it. You have the government leadership, NGOs behind it, the issues like early marriages.
Exactly.
Now, this is something that where if a girl is married at age 12, taken out of school, she's pregnant, the majority of child deaths are coming through pregnancy complications for young mothers. You know? Now, there is a strong move